Never before, surely, has there been a country quite the way China is today. 700 million people, whether they through fear or belief matters little. 700 million minds are being replaced by this red book, The Thoughts of Chairman Mao Zedong.
Chairman Mao is our great leader. Let me sing a dance. Round of Chairman Mao. 天天大地大，预备唱。天大地大，我罗大天天大。
These are Chinese students in the park of the Temple of Heaven in Peking. They are singing a song called Chairman Mao is Dearer Than Our Parents. Father is close to us, mother is close to us, they sing, but not as close as Chairman Mao. The sea is deep, but not as deep as class love. Chairman Mao's thought is the jewel of the revolution. Whoever opposes it is our enemy. Good evening. The following is a chronicle of a visit to another world. This broadcast traces a 20-day tour of communist China that I made in July with CBS News cameraman John Peters. Traveling to Red China is a little like traveling in a time machine, only you don't know whether you're traveling forward into the future or backward into the past. 1984 or 1884, perhaps a little of both. You leave 1967 behind you when your Russian airliner takes off from Irkutsk in Siberia, and you step through the looking glass when you touch down in Peking. Our visas issued in Paris were for a standard guided tour. The question of what we did for a living was never raised, either by us or by the Chinese. I, incidentally, travel on a Canadian passport. Peters is British. We covered 5 cities and their surrounding countryside: Peking, Xi'an, Yan'an, Shanghai, and Canton. Our itinerary was chosen for us, but not surprisingly, did not include any of the troubled centers like the industrial city of Wuhan. The tour began in Peking. And your first impression and lasting one of China is noise. Noise and youth, and all of it in praise of Chairman Mao. The China we saw was in a state of continuous demonstration, a make-believe world, an Orwellian nightmare. From dawn till past midnight, the capital heaves with noise. Posters and loudspeakers blare the thought of Mao everywhere. And in the streets, unending demonstrations of loyalty and belief. That is the China we saw. The thought of Mao went unquestioned. Compulsory study, once, twice, a dozen times a day, for everyone, Chinese and tourists alike. Your guide is your constant companion and your instructor.
Yes, indeed. This morning I would like to read a passage of Chairman Mao's quotation so that I can show you the criterion of our literature and art. The Chairman Mao pointed out, in literary and art criticism, there are 2 criteria, the political and the artistic. There is the political criterion and there is the artistic criterion. What is the relationship between the 2? Politics cannot be equated with art. Each class in every class society has its own political and artistic criteria. But all classes in all class societies invariably put the political criterion first and the artistic criterion second. Therefore, we oppose both works of art with a wrong political viewpoint and the tendency towards the poster and the slogan style, which is correct in political viewpoint, but lacking in artistic power.
The relics of old China, like everything else, show the scars of China's cultural revolution. Most of the slogans proclaim the greatness of the thought of Mao and the supremacy of his most militant disciples, the Red Guards. But here and there, even in the centers of Maoist control, evidence of dissent. The sign plastered on this effigy of an ancient statesman proclaims that the Red leadership, one of the conservative groups, will be victorious. that the Red Guards will ultimately fail. And it is on this kind of evidence that China watchers and even China witnesses like myself base their judgments of the current trouble. But in China's biggest population centers, this kind of evidence is rare indeed. This is a sign that is seen everywhere. Hung Wei Bing, in translation, Red Defense Guard. They are the children of Mao, his most fervent missionaries. Chairman Mao has given them his approval, and whole cities have been placed under the rule of these mindless disciples. A world ruled by children gone mad, a mixture of hooliganism and blind faith. One of them told me, one leader, one thought, one revolution. I met with some of these Red Guards.
First, I would like to give respect to our Chairman Mao. Long life to him.
We're in Peking Agricultural University, sitting with a group of Red Guard leaders and discussing Mao Zedong's thought and the position of the Red Guards in the country and as far regards China's foreign policy.
你们念中文，我翻成英文过去，是吧？
同时念吧。同时念吧。我们的伟大导师、伟大领袖、伟大统帅、伟大舵手毛主席教导我们说：革命不是请客吃饭，不是做文章，不是。
A revolution is not a dinner party or writing an essay or painting a picture or doing embroidery. It cannot be so refined, so leisurely and gentle, so temperate, kind, courteous, restrained, and magnanimous. A revolution is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. People of the world unite and defeat the U.S. aggressors and all their running dogs. People of the world, be courageous, dare to fight, defy difficulties, and advance wave upon wave. Then the whole world will belong to the people. Monsters of all kinds shall be destroyed. What does the thought of Chairman Mao and the Cultural Revolution mean, say, to this young man here?
请你回答一下。
毛泽东思想就是帝国主义走向全面崩溃。
Chairman Mao has thought the imperialism in the whole world and other reactionaries, they are going to be collapsed. And the thought of Chairman Mao is just developing to the new stage or the new epoch of Leninism.
What do these people think of the Soviet
他
Union?
说：“你们对这个苏联是怎么想法？”
苏联现在已经退化变成，已经退到这个资本主义社会了，完全实行了资本主义复辟。尤其赫鲁晓夫这个修正主义集团嘛，他们完全背叛了马克思列宁主义，不要无产阶级革命，不要无产阶级专政，实行这个什么这个和平共处、和平共度、和平竞赛，这个实行全民党、全民国家，这些都是背叛了马克思列宁主义。
出卖世界人民革命利益。
In Soviet Union, they have really back to the capitalism already. See, the restoration of the capitalism is getting on. See, they don't want proletariat revolution. They don't want socialism, such as the Khrushchev's clique. See, Khrushchev's clique. They intend to have peaceful transition, peaceful evolution, and so on.
What do they think of the United States?
你们对于美国怎么看法呢？
美帝国主义是世界人民头号的敌人。
Is the U.S. imperialist is the top enemy of the people of the whole world.
我们从来都当美帝国主义
侵略战争，他这个侵略其他和平社会主义国家的人民，到处屠杀和掠夺其他的国家爱好和平的国家，这是全世界人民最凶恶的敌人。
You see, the U.S. imperialists launch aggressive wars wherever they go. They kill the poor peoples, they oppress the peoples in other countries, and so on.
One more question. What do these young people want to do for China?
You see, it's very, very simple. Just 2 words. Well, with the answer to you, that's make revolution.
It is perhaps too easy to find analogies with Orwell's Animal Farm, but you run smack into them wherever you go. There's no attempt to mask the regimentation of society. All ducks, horses, cattle, pigs, and people are equal. Everyone serves the people. That is the supreme instruction of Chairman Mao. This is the People's Commune of Chinese-Albanian Friendship. Production on this commune has increased 9-fold in the past few years. This is due to better methods, better fertilization. But the directors here say that the main reason that production has increased at such a fantastic rate is through the study and use of the thought of Chairman Mao Zedong. The Chinese we met were proud of the achievements of 17 years of communist rule. But in the past 18 months, since the so-called Cultural Revolution began, all tribute is paid to Mao. Fatter pigs through greater study. Today's lesson, without the communists as the mainstay of the Chinese people, China can never achieve independence and liberation, or industrialization and the modernization of her agriculture. This was a scene at the Sino-Albanian commune that our guides were not happy about, but they did not prevent us from filming it. 10-year-old children bringing in fodder. Each one has a norm to fulfill. Each offering is weighed and tallied. Each name and number is ticked. An unfulfilled norm means that the worker in question, I was told, had shirked in his study of Chairman Mao. A full day's work is rewarded with a study session rewarded with work, and always hymns of praise. They sing, "The ship cannot sail without a helmsman. We rely on the thought of Chairman Mao. Fish cannot leave the water. The revolutionary masses cannot depart from the Communist Party. The thought of Mao is the sun that never sets." Peking People's Swimming Pool number 1. When I commented to the guide that this was an impressive pool, I was told that while Chairman Mao tells us to work hard, be resolute, frugal, and diligent, that recreational facilities must also be provided for the broad masses of workers, peasants, and soldiers. So, thanks to Chairman Mao and the party, we have this swimming pool. There is very little escape in Peking from the constant hammering of Maoism. Peking Carpet Factory number 1. Workers earn 67 yuan a month, about $27. But rent is 50 cents a month in a company dormitory. Food is cheap, medical service free. Meager salaries, but everyone works and everyone eats, which perhaps in itself is a great leap forward. The workmanship is precise, the quality excellent. These carpets are for export, to earn badly needed capitalist currency. These carpets are for the home market. It's not all drudgery. From Peking on a Sunday afternoon, you can escape by bus to the surrounding mountain country. The Chinese love to eat well, and the food everywhere in China was excellent. The biggest weekend attraction for everyone, including tourists, the Great Wall of China. What does the poem say about the wall? Just
in praise of the Great Wall here. See, it's what a beauty. It's our landscape. See, beautiful landscape in our motherland.
And the children, as they pass up here, chant the poem.
This of Chairman Mao's poem.
I'm standing in a place called the Terrace of the Clouds, about 40 miles from Peking, and behind me one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Great Wall of China.
The Great Wall was built 2,200 years ago. Each of the states built a part of the wall for their own defense use. The whole wall is actually 6,000 kilometers.
Almost 4,000 miles, it snakes through the mountains of province after province. It was designed to keep the Mongols out and the native Chinese in. It achieved neither. 20 centuries later, a more effective barrier was designed. The Daily Catechism. The force at the core leading our cause forward is the Chinese Communist Party. Page 1, paragraph 1 of the thought of Mao Zedong. In Peking, we were told that our tour would have to be changed. It would be impossible, we were told, to visit the cities of Nanking, Suzhou, and Hangzhou. When I asked why, I was told that those cities were closed to tourists for organizational reasons. We were offered Xi'an and Yan'an instead. As it turned out, we did get a glimpse of Nanking. Bad weather forced our plane down there, and we spent the night. And there we saw evidence of opposition to Mao. Signs in praise of Mao had been knocked down, others plastered over by opposition signs, and those plastered over yet again by Maoist signs. But the city was functioning, and loudspeakers were blaring out pro-Mao songs and slogans, and of course quotations from the familiar Red Book. Our next real stop was Xi'an, which is, it seems, firmly committed to Chairman Mao and the Cultural Revolution. The Red Book is more than any Bible. Nowhere in the world had we ever seen the word of God, Christ, Moses, Buddha, or Muhammad received with more apparent adoration. When we receive our red books, the little girl sings, I feel he is standing beside me. This is the standard dance they do in Chinese schools. The boy with the sword and the olive branch represents Lyndon Johnson. Peace in one hand, they say, war in the other. All the world, these children are singing, will soon discover that Johnson is a big robber and a big liar, and they will put him down. They will accuse him, as they're doing now, and he will bend his knee in fear, still holding his olive branch and his sword, and ending on, down with U.S. imperialism. Schools all over China have been closed for more than a year as part of the Cultural Revolution. Just last month, they began to reopen, but the only classes being conducted are classes in the thought of Chairman Mao. Power grows out of the barrel of a gun, they repeat. The individual is subordinate to the organization. We, the Chinese people, must liberate those countries not yet liberated. How much is said in devotion? Or is it simply lip service, a nursery rhyme? That is impossible to fathom. A week, a month, a year from now, these children might be calling Mao an enemy of the people. One faith, one doctrine, one leader. All religious symbols have been removed in China, all pagodas closed down. The Buddhist priests, The bonzes, I was told, are now all taking part in the Cultural Revolution. All the museums are closed because they do not properly reflect the class struggle. They are all undergoing cultural reorganization. The four olds must be wiped out. The Red Guards and the loudspeakers keep repeating it. Old ideas, old habits, old customs, old cultures. And here in Xi'an, once the capital of China, reputed to have been the world's richest city 2,000 years ago, the thought of Mao echoes through the streets where once they cheered the victorious armies of Tang and Han emperors. This is the Xi'an People's Enamelware Works. In the last few years, these people working in this plant have increased their production, they say, by 14%. All due, they say, to studying the works of Chairman Mao Zedong. And the loudspeaker you hear urges them on to greater production through studying the thought of Chairman Mao. Here in this factory, as in every stop we made, the briefing begins with the thought of Mao.
Chairman Mao said, people of the world, unite and defeat the U.S. aggressors. Be courageous, dare to fight, defy difficulties, and advance wave upon wave. Then the whole world will belong to the people. Monsters and all kinds shall be destroyed.
Everywhere I go, people say that they are able to work harder and produce more because they're armed with the thought of Chairman Mao.
Yes.
How is this effective in production?
他说是人们都讲啊，这个用这个毛泽东思想来武装以后啊，可以增加生产。那么这个工厂里头的这一方面怎么样？
我们的工厂，这个去年的总产值啊，比1952年开厂那年的总产值啊，增长了14倍多。
The total production value of last year increased because the workers studied very hard Chairman Mao's work, so they accomplished their production targets of first season of this year 4 days ahead of time schedule.
And how does Chairman Mao's thought help them in their everyday life?
每天呢都要坚持学习主席著作，解决自己思想的问题，解决自己生活里面的问题，解决自己工作上的问题。
解决了什么问题？你看一下。Because the workers love Chairman Mao very much. Every day, they persist in studying Chairman Mao's work for 1 hour. So many difficulties have been solved by the workers, including their daily lives, the difficulties in their daily lives, of course.
比如说，毛主席教导我们说呀，比那个小组提高了3倍多。
First, the director will tell you how the workers solve their problems in their production. Chairman Mao says the history of mankind is one of continuous development from the realm of necessity to the realm of freedom.
There's nothing special about this day. This is a normal, everyday occurrence in modern China. We're near the small city of Xi'an. These are local farmers demonstrating for Mao Zedong and for the thought of Mao Zedong. Make revolution, they chant time after time. Make revolution, down with U.S. imperialism. On they go. Endless train of people, day and night, in every town and village of China.
下定决心不怕牺牲，排除万难一生的胜利。下定决心不怕牺牲，排除万难一生的胜利。下定决心不怕牺牲，排除万难一生的胜利。
This is the People's Commune of the Great Leap Forward. And here the very old and the middle-aged, but particularly the very young, sing and read the thoughts of Chairman Mao Zedong.
下定决心不怕牺牲，排除万难一生的胜利。
At moments, distance up here in the highlands of Shenxi province, you see things that seem as old as the land itself. And it was among the peasants of China that Mao received his first and most fervent support. He stumped the countryside in the 20s, preaching revolution. They followed, and Mao in his time has given them their miracle. They have traded the bullock for the machine. It may look primitive, but in fact, it is a giant leap forward. The bullock has been electrified. The people have been served. Serve the people. You hear it everywhere you go in China. It was that doctrine that caught the imagination of millions of peasants in the years of civil war. It is what we call now a hearts and minds program. Indeed, men's minds seem controlled, but death from starvation is no longer a likelihood in rural China. The land has been collectivized and communized. There have been disasters, but productivity has increased. But even during famine, the Chinese peasants knew that for the first time, there was some kind of central authority that cared. That perhaps is why the communists won. In the gospel, according to Chairman Mao, the revolution, the original Chinese revolution, and the present cultural revolution are for three classes of people: the soldiers, the peasants, and the workers. And here in the fields of Xi'an, soldiers of the so-called People's Liberation Army are out with farmers. All of these men are draftees, according to our guide, and accompanying them in the fields, of course, the red flag of China and a portrait of Chairman Mao. Like everyone else in China, the Chinese army loves to sing. And here they're about to sing a song called "The Ship Cannot Sail Without a Helmsman." And of course, it's about Chairman Mao Zedong. This is what I mean about religious fervor. As we stood in that field near Xi'an, it was as though we were in a Spanish village on a saint's day. The effigy tilting along, the banners raised, the voices chanting. But this is different. Soldiers of the People's Liberation Army remember their struggles, revolution, civil war. But what of the children of Mao? These minds know only the absolute of mindless acceptance and parrot-like repetition. If anything frightens a visitor to China today, it is the children. From Xi'an, we went to Yan'an. This indeed is Mao country. It was here in 1935 that he ended the Long March, the year-long 6,000-mile trek that began with 90,000 troops and ended with only 20,000. Chiang Kai-Shek's Kuomintang army and nature had taken a heavy toll. But up here in the caves in the mountains of Shenxi province, Mao found sanctuary. He lived here for 14 years, up until victory. Here his army rested and recruited. Volunteers from all over China made the pilgrimage to Yan'an to meet Mao, who by then had become chairman of the party, and to fight on the communist side. Chiang's army surrounded the area. The Japanese struck from the air, but the communist leaders were secure in their caves around Yan'an. It was here, too, that Mao wrote most of his revolutionary tracts. The thought of Mao was inspired up here, and throughout, through everything he wrote, he stressed the simple life, frugality, diligence. Ours is a big socialist country, he wrote, but economically backward and poor. To make China rich and strong needs several decades of intense effort to practice strict economy and combat waste. Thrift should be our guiding principle, he said. It should be made clear to everyone that corruption and waste are very great crimes. Every copper must be saved for the revolutionary cause and for economic construction. Mao is gone in person, but his effigy and his words loom over this simple mountain city. The austerity that Mao preaches is to be seen in Yan'an and all over China. Simple peasant clothes are the order of the day for everyone. The language of China is the language of Mao. Everything couched in revolutionary military terms, all mixed up with Marxist-Leninist homilies. Farm workers are divided into brigades. Families are units. And because China claims to be a classless society, people are called such things as lower middle-level peasants or upper middle-level workers. Even the army has had its badges of rank removed to get rid of any class distinction. And when I asked my guide how you tell a general from a private, she said, generals are older. The appeal for hard work and honesty seems to have worked. The corruption, petty thievery, and begging that is so evident in much of Asia is absolutely absent in China. Tipping is forbidden. It's almost impossible to throw anything away. Hotel workers will chase you down the hall with discarded razor blades and worn-out shoes. And the other thing that strikes you is the utter absolute cleanliness. Unlike Vietnam or Singapore or Hong Kong, the streets are free of refuse, and the entire nation seems to have outlawed mosquitoes, flies, and bugs of all kinds, by order of the party. And Yan'an, too, is plastered with the signs of the Cultural Revolution. It is forbidden by law for foreigners to look at the daily wall posters that are put up by the Red Guards. We managed a brief peek. This one is an announcement to the middle and lower level peasants. It begins with the familiar, the supreme instruction is, and goes on about the revolution and political rights. The caves of Yan'an and the concrete bunkers once used by Mao and his revolutionary committee have been turned into museums. They are about the only museum still open in China. You are shown the simple bed he slept in, the desk he used, the pen he wrote with. That particular kind of adoration is not exclusive to the Chinese. Yan'an has become a national shrine to Chairman Mao. This place and the Long March are about the only things the Chinese get sentimental about. To have been on the Long March is to have crossed in the Mayflower. The red and black sign is yet another thought of Mao, one of the millions of billboards like it all over China. This one is on contradiction. The unification of opposites, it says, is the basic law of nature and society, and the basic law of thought. That is the supreme instruction. Yan'an to Shanghai. And flying in CAAC, the Chinese national airline, is quite an experience. Instead of the familiar fasten your seatbelts, no smoking, the hostess asks you all to open your red book. The supreme instruction is, she says, and then everyone reads together. This is followed by a few songs from the hostess, a dance or two, and then the plane's loudspeaker takes over with songs of praise for the entire journey. No filming allowed. Shanghai airport was almost deserted of other civilian planes, but the runways were alive with military traffic, MiGs and twin-engine jet bombers. Once again, we were forbidden to take pictures. Shanghai itself was bursting with Maoist demonstrations, and everywhere we went, we were told that those who opposed Chairman Mao were only, and I quote, a handful of top party persons in authority who are taking the capitalist road. It was always couched in that formal phrase, and always stressed that there were only a few. We were reminded once again that it was forbidden to look at or photograph the daily wall posters. When I asked why, I was told curtly that it was none of my business. The posters told of trouble at the industrial center of Wuhan, of groups of top party persons, etc., who opposed the thought of Mao and the Red Guards. Our tour of Shanghai was at moments a frightening experience. This is where the memory of Western influence is most bitter. The Bund, the area around the port of Shanghai, was up to 1949 divided into areas of British, French, and American influence. The very first landmark you are shown is the Riverside Park, where a sign once stood. No dogs are Chinese, it said. And it was here last spring that the excesses of the Cultural Revolution reached a new peak. The Red Guards, or as their older brothers are called, the Revolutionary Rebels, now control Shanghai, every aspect of its life, its civic administration, its schools, such as they are, its industry, and its port. For weeks in March and April, the port of Shanghai lay idle. The Chinese admit this. It was not that the establishment was anti-communist, it was simply that the Red Guards rode roughshod over anything and anyone who opposed them. Some of the older workers and technicians rebelled against people they regarded as arrogant hooligans. Shanghai simply stopped. A general strike, not in rebellion against an ideology, but in opposition to fanaticism. Now the city functions, or seems to. Rice and other goods move upriver. Foreign ships are cleared. The guide says these students are simply serving the people by volunteering for work as stevedores. The fact is, they've been recruited to clear Shanghai docks of a pileup of imports and exports. But Shanghai is a bustling city. The wagons that used to pick up bodies of people who died of starvation in the days of Western influence no longer patrol the streets. Child prostitution, slavery, opium traffic no longer exist. Shanghai, once the most sinful city in the Orient, is China's most puritanical, most noisy and confused. All shop signs were removed in favor of signs of praise to Chairman Mao, a chaos of conformity. But somehow it functions. Shanghai's Red Guards like to demonstrate their authority, their total rejection of the past. These students told me that formal education was a capitalist bourgeois preoccupation, that pure intellectual pursuit did not conform to the Maoist concept of serving the people. I was able to confirm one story of an elderly Chinese professor of history, Wang Qian, who was dismissed from his class by his students, smeared with coal, a revisionist sign hung around his neck. After 2 days of starvation, he killed himself. Every worker here is required to demonstrate twice a day. This in addition to regular study. Shanghai truck plant number 2. 1,300 people work 3 shifts a day here, but each 8-hour shift is broken by a 2-hour study session of the thought of Chairman Mao. Every workbench in the plant is graced with a portrait of the supreme instructor. The factory is busy, the workers seem devoted. CBS News cameraman John Peters, who is more expert in automobile engines than I am, pointed out that the workmanship was extraordinary. Almost every part is hand-tooled. They build a truck, said Peters, with the kind of precision that gave Rolls-Royce its reputation. By American or Western European standards, the plant may look primitive. Almost everything done by hand. But automation would be no great boon to China's 700 million people. The finished product, the total output of the plant of 1,300 workers, 2 trucks a day. Shanghai Steel Mill number 3 has doubled its production since the Cultural Revolution began, according to the Revolutionary Rebels who now run the plant. But clearly there was trouble here last January, during the time described by the Red Guards as the January Storm. The rebels told me that there was a period of inactivity when they hunted down people they described as those who would take the capitalist road. Again, it appears that these were conservatives and technicians who stood up to the revolutionary rebels. Technical expertise, like intellectual pursuit, is suspect among the Red Guards. The rolling mills are working once again, but now to the tune of the Supreme Instructor. The two men wearing red armbands are revolutionary rebels who now run the plant. The others are technical experts who have admitted their errors and now support the proletarian cultural revolution. They have learned, they say, that politics rules everything, including the operation of a steel mill. We support the revolutionary rebels who weed out revisionists among us, they say, and give us the supreme instruction of our great helmsman, Mao Zedong. Some other impressions and memories of Shanghai. I found that Red Guards and revolutionary rebels were much more vehement about what they called treacherous Soviet revisionism than they were about charges of American aggression in Vietnam. In that steel mill in Shanghai, I was told that the Soviets cheated the Chinese in their trade agreements, overcharged them, and made huge profits. And those students we met, there was an almost stunning lack of curiosity about the West. After listening to a 2-hour briefing on the Cultural Revolution, I asked them if there was anything they would like to know about life in the West. Nothing. The extent to which the Red Guards have taken over was illustrated in a hospital we visited. The hospital is now run by medical students. And while they briefed us, told us that formal medical training was a waste of time, I asked the one doctor who was present, a specialist, what he thought of that. He barely got a word out. His students told him not to speak. Almost automatically, the doctor put his hands by his side and bowed his head. He did not move while the Red Guards told me that the study of Mao was more effective than the study of medicine, that formal study was self-serving and led to bourgeois thinking. But the most frightening experience in Shanghai followed a visit to the People's Industrial Exhibition Hall. My guide pointed out a machine and stated proudly that the Chinese had to build the machine themselves because of the U.S. imperialists and all of their running dogs had blockaded the People's Republic. I pointed out that while the United States did not trade with China, this country's allies did, Canada and Britain, that neutral countries would happily sell the Chinese industrial machinery, Sweden, for example. The guide, Mr. Tao, flew into a rage. The next morning, as I entered the hotel lobby, I was summoned to a private reception room. Tao was there wearing a red armband, and seated round a table were 3 women and 2 men, also red armbands. I was told it was a revolutionary court, and that I was guilty of crimes against the Chinese people, insulting the thought of Chairman Mao, insulting the people's machines, and guilty of spreading the poisonous weeds of bourgeois democracy. The woman who appeared to be in charge said I must admit my errors quickly. I started to say that these charges were the result of a misunderstanding. 5 fists hit the table at once. Not charges, crimes, they shouted. And random lines from the courtroom in Alice in Wonderland went through my mind. Suppress him, pinch him, off with his whiskers, cried the Queen of Hearts. It was that kind of trial. I was then ordered to admit my mistakes quickly, or I would come to a bad end. Having no interest in coming to a bad end, I admitted my mistakes and was allowed to continue with the tour. Shanghai to Canton. The journey by air had become routine by now. The mass reading, singing, hostesses dancing. When we finally left China, planes seemed curiously quiet. We had become used to the theater in the sky. Canton for us was a more enjoyable experience than Shanghai. Just as much Mao, but just a touch more sanity. Canton is less than 100 miles from the border with Hong Kong. This was the most westernized city we visited. Most of the overseas Chinese have roots here. Most Chinese Americans are Cantonese. When you go to a Chinese restaurant, the chances are you will be eating Cantonese food. We spent most of the time there at the Flower Hill Commune, a huge communal farm about 40 miles from the city. We arrived on market day and found one of the few anomalies of China. This market is capitalist in the extreme. The produce that the commune members grow in their private gardens is sold here for profit, pure and simple. So far, the regime has done nothing about it. At the commune, we talked to one peasant, a Mr. Mayao. At 37, he has experienced revolutionary and pre-revolutionary China in equal parts. Would you ask Mr. Mayao to compare life now with life before the revolution?
係咪你可以談一談你解放前後生活嘅對比？
咁因為嗰個時候話耕緊地主嘅田啊。
We worked for the landlord, but because we could not pay the rent to the landlord, and my mother sold my elder sister to the landlord as a servant.
所以響嗰時候啊，呢個搞到佢妻離子散啊！呢個響我哋嘅山隊嘅時候咧，呢個賣兒賣女啊，都賣出咗8個人。
Many people sold their children. As far as I know, in my village, 8 children were sold to other families.
Now what is life like 17 years after the revolution?
而家解放後啊，呢個生活解放17年嚟生活有咩變化？
我哋跟我哋呢度嘢解放咗嚟之後咧。
At the time of the liberation, our country was still very poor, a country of poverty and blankness, and the production level was still very low. In 1958, the People's Commune was established, and I joined the People's Commune.
How has life improved for the people in this commune?
Formerly, peasants did not have bicycles. Now we have more than 20 bicycles in this village. Before the liberation, there was only one. We have 8 sewing machines.
8 sewing machines?
Yes. And 4 radios receivers. Now we have 3 meals of rice. While before we have only white vegetables and chaff.
Chaff.
所以響咁樣嘅時候，我哋咧社員啊，睇到黨同毛主席啊，俾我哋嘅恩情。
So the member of the commune have seen the happiness brought by the party and by Chairman Mao.
所以我哋咧就一定要好好地啊。
So we must follow the teachings of Chairman Mao and follow the works of the Communist Party and study Chairman Mao works well. As Chairman Mao teaches us that we all hail from all corners of the sea for a common revolutionary objective, and we must run our production well in order to carry on our production. At the beginning, we could not stand the criticism from the masses, but after we studied Chairman Mao's work, we are not afraid to have our shortcomings pointed out or criticized because we serve the people. So we are quite happy, and we welcome the criticisms from the people, from the masses. And to solve the problem of the unity among the members, we also teach them with Chairman Mao's teachings. For instance, in one family, the uncle and the sister-in-law relation was not so good since 1958.
後來我哋組織咗佢哋呢個兩個學習，每日教導我哋啊。
So we teach them with the quotations from Chairman Mao. We hail from all corners of the sea for a common revolutionary objective. So now their relations have been very close and improved. Many people, young people want to go to the city and to work in the factory and didn't want to settle down in the countryside at the beginning. So we organized the young people to study Chairman Mao's work. Chairman Mao said, in our country, we have a vast countryside, and the young people have much to do in the countryside. So the young people become settled down in the countryside. That's all. Now, instead of putting the worship, the ancestor tablets, we put the portrait of Chairman Mao.
The picture of Chairman Mao has replaced the old idols of the past.
Yes, that's right. So we hope that the people of the world will enjoy a happy life as we Chinese people. So the member of the company knows that we are now farming for the revolution, not only for ourselves. So we must study Chairman Mao's works every day and apply it in a creative way.
Creative way.
Yes. And run better our production so as to pay our debts to the party.
The China we saw was the China our guides wanted us to see. A nation being squeezed dry of its personality, where independent thought is a crime against the state. What makes it seem so incredible is that that is the image the Chinese want to project. But something else is happening in China, something we caught only a glimpse of. It would be a mistake, I think, to believe that China is going through another civil war, that the broad masses, to use the communist term, are in rebellion against the monolith of communism. Here in the West, perhaps, we make too much of the too little information that seeps out of China. I can think of one example. After 2 days in Canton, in which I moved about part of the time unguided, I crossed over the Lowu Bridge to Hong Kong. Western newspapers that afternoon reported rioting in the streets, shootings, and a general strike in Canton. I saw none of it. But in the secret places of China, Wuhan, Nanking, and in other cities perhaps, there is clearly a rejection of the heavy hand of Peking. Not necessarily of communism or even of Maoism. There is, it seems to me, a movement backward in some places to the regionalism that has existed traditionally in China. Some other thoughts after 3 weeks on what now seems another planet. That this communist society, with all of its excesses, has at least raised China's gigantic population out of the dark ages of feudalism. It may have created something worse, but it also created the climate of revolution that enables the monster to destroy itself. And other thoughts. What of the elite of the communist society? The scientists who gave China its hydrogen bomb, have they fallen victims of the Red Guards? It seems unlikely. They probably still remain above ideology. Philosophy, literature, art are dead subjects, for the moment anyway. One other impression that gnaws at you in that hysterical world of communist China, the chasm that it seems to separate our two societies. It is not metaphorical to say we are worlds apart. It's almost a sense of tragedy you have inside China, the lack of curiosity about us, the lack of desire to make contact with us. And equally tragic to think that for so long the reverse was true, that in the cool, unhurried world of democracy, we could be equally oblivious, equally paranoid. It will be a long time before each world becomes rational about the other. This is Morley Safer reporting. Good night.
Hey, tough!